The following presentation occurred during the 2022 South-Southwest Mental Health Technology Transfer Center, MHTTC, First Episode Psychosis, FEP, Conference. This conference occurred from June 1st to June 3rd, 2022 in a hybrid format, with approximately 150 in-person participants in Austin, Texas, and 300 virtual participants from around the world. Conference attendees shared a range of identities and positionalities, including those with lived experience, family members, providers, and researchers. The 2022 theme of innovation and sustainability highlighted not only the radical advancement within early psychosis programs over the past decade, but also the continued transformation that we hope to see of mental health structures and research serving youth and young adults living with psychosis. This conference was an opportunity to engage in shared dialogue across difference, struggle with new ideas, and re-envision a future for mental health structures for youth and young adults living with psychosis. This conference was coordinated and hosted by the South-Southwest Mental Health Technology Transfer Center, MHTTC, in Region 6. An initiative funded by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration to provide free training and ongoing consultation to all professionals that serve individuals with mental health needs. Region 6 includes the states of Texas, Oklahoma, New Mexico, Arkansas, Louisiana, and our tribal communities. The South-Southwest MHTTC is a project of the Texas Institute for Excellence in Mental Health, which is housed at the Steve Hicks School of Social Work at the University of Texas at Austin. By way of a disclaimer, this conference was prepared for the MHTTC network under a cooperative agreement from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, also known as SAMHSA. The opinions expressed throughout the conference are the views of our speakers and do not reflect the official position of the Department of Health and Human Services or SAMHSA.
It is an honor this morning to introduce to you Mix Yaffa. Mix Yaffa is an award-winning, disabled, mad, trans, queer, Muslim, indigenous Palestinian. Mix Yaffa conducts transformative work around displacement, decolonization, equity, and centering lived experiences of individuals most impacted by injustice. Mix Yaffa is a storyteller and an equity and transformation consultant, having shared their story with over 100,000 audience members at speaking events globally. Mix Yaffa has worked in over 24 countries and specializes in global and community vision building. They are an engineer with a specialty in sustainability and social engineering and a peer support specialist. They have an MA in conflict transformation and social justice from Queen's University, Belfast, a childhood traumatic stress graduate certificate from the Boston Trauma Center, and a Bachelor's of Science in Mechanical Engineering from WPI. Mix Yaffa uses peer support as a foundation for all of their work, supporting peer-run spaces in organizational capacity building, equity, and sustainment. Mix Yaffa brings together engineering, peer support, and trauma to support their vision for a more equitable and accountable communities that lead individuals' self-actualization. Mix Yaffa is the founder of several nonprofits and community projects, such as CT Mutual Aid and Life in My Days, an international nonprofit that supports individuals and their communities on their journeys for self-actualization through mutual aid, transformative justice, and disability justice. We will learn from them today about social, historical, and cultural factors that impact care for individuals experiencing psychosis through an intersectional lens. A warm welcome to Mix Yaffa for their talk, The Intersections of Psychosis and Marginalization.
Good morning, everyone. Can you all hear me okay? Is this mic working? All right, because I have enormous hair, and so I never know with mics if they'll just get lost in the hair. How are you all feeling today? Amazing. Can we get a round of applause for the breakfast tacos? Those were important. So before I actually jump into the presentation today and even introducing myself a bit further and all of those different things, we're actually just going to start with a bit of an exercise. So a bit of a backstory. One of my favorite instructors in college, back when I was studying engineering, and don't get me wrong, there was only like 3 on this list. It was really easy to get on this list of favorite instructors at the time. But it was this guy, I don't even remember what he was teaching, but it was at 8 a.m. It was an 8 a.m. class. And like a few weeks into the class, he just looks at us and is like, why are you all like passed out? And someone was like, it's 8:12. And he was like, oh, do y'all want naps? We were like, okay, this is weird. But he basically gave us nap time for the rest of the semester for 5 minutes every single day. And it was one of my favorite classes. Did not learn anything. Don't remember what I was taking either, but one of my favorite instructors. And I passed the class, so it was fine. So we're not quite going to do a nap time, but we're going to do a bit of a meditation just to kind of ground us into today's conversation, ground us from yesterday's conversations and the day before, all of the incredible things that have been happening. So we're just going to kind of take a bit of a step back and just ground ourselves. And we're just going to get started with just a few deep breaths. If you're comfortable, feel free to close your eyes. And it's okay if you actually fall asleep. That's important too. We're just going to take a deep breath in through our nose and out through our mouth. And feel free to really exaggerate that exhale. So a few more, just in through our nose. And allow yourself with that exhale for whatever is coming up for you, just allow yourself to release it into the space where we can all carry it together. With our next deep breath, allow the flow of air to go into your chest, into our heart cavity. Honoring everything that we love, all of the compassion that we carry within us, all of the inspiration, all of the empowerment, allowing us to just sit with that for a moment. With your next deep inhale, allow the flow of air to go a bit lower into your abdomen. You just had those breakfast tacos. Allow yourself to check in with how that's feeling. Allow yourself to check in with anything else that's coming up for you. Any challenges, any conflict, anything that's made you uncomfortable over the last couple of days. And with your exhale, release it into this space where we can all carry it together. And with your next deep inhale, allow the flow of air to go to your to your hips, to your hips, honoring that's one of the first points of contact for any challenges, for conflict, for trauma that's happening in our lives. Allow yourself to really honor anything that's happening outside of these 4 walls, everything that's been pulling your attention elsewhere, everything that's been pulling your attention to where you don't want it to be, even within this space, honoring that all of it is valid and all of it deserves your time and attention, and release it into this space where we can carry it together. With your next deep inhale, allow the flow of air to go into your thighs, into the spaces where we store our long-term trauma, the things that have happened to us over the last few years, into our childhoods, decades ago potentially. Honoring every single step that we have taken to be where we are today, that allowed us to be in this space together. And allow yourself to honor everything that's coming up for you and release it into the space where we can carry it together without having to name it. With your next deep inhale, allow the flow of air to go into your calves, into this very moment in time, into that space between where we've been and where we want to go. honoring that this moment is valid, where we are today is valid, is worthy of celebration. It's not just about everything that we've gone through and everywhere that we're heading to. With your next deep breath, allow the flow of air to go into your feet. Maybe wiggle your toes if you want to. Feel the ground underneath you. And allow yourself to really honor everywhere that you want to go to. Every moment in time beyond this moment. Honoring everything that's coming up for you. And again, releasing it into the space where we can carry it together. And with your next deep inhale, allow the flow of air to settle on your shoulders. In that space where we usually carry the weight of the world, the weight of our jobs, of our families, of our friends, the weight of our own journeys, the weight of justice, the weight of equity, the weight of everything out there. Honor everything that you have been carrying, that you are carrying in this moment in time, and allow yourself with that exhale to release it into the space where we can carry it together. With your next deep breath, allow the flow of air to go downwards to your forearms, honoring all of the mechanisms that have allowed us to reach the things that we have, allowed us to inspire, allowed us to empower, allowed us to move forward in various ways. Allow yourself to release that into the space. With your next deep breath, allow the flow of air to go into your hands, feeling the sensation in your fingers, honoring every single moment of inspiration and empowerment and just everything that you've touched in this life, everyone that you've inspired, everyone that you've empowered, all of the love that you've extended by extending your arms in this role in your day-to-day life, just everything that you do. With your next deep breath, allow the flow of air to go upwards into your brain, into the organ that gets villainized quite often and has kept us alive, has allowed us to thrive, has allowed us to find coping mechanisms that we never thought possible, that has allowed us to transform, allowed us to innovate, honoring everything coming up for you, allowing yourself to release it into this space. With your next deep breath, allow yourself to begin floating upwards, away from your body, away from everything else that you brought into the space. And just allow yourself to hover, allow yourself to feel peace, love, compassion, recognizing that as you're floating away, that you're floating within that embrace of love, compassion, peace, harmony, everything. And as you do so, allow yourself to come into a space, recognizing that this space is yours, that this space is where peace will always be, where love will always be, where harmony will always be, that nobody else can ever touch this space but you. And allow yourself to just be in that space. Allow yourself to walk around, to visualize what it looks like. Allow yourself to take in different markers of it. Allow yourself to really hold on to those feelings, that sense of belonging, of being fully seen and fully accepted for everything that you are or can ever be. Allow yourself to just be there, walk around, dance around, do whatever you'd like to do in this space. And as you continue walking, you see a hot air balloon in the distance. You begin walking towards it because there's a cool hot air balloon, and so why would you not? Allowing yourself again to bathe in that peace and that harmony. And as you get into the hot air balloon, you feel an immense level of support. And as it begins rising, you feel yourself rising, recognizing that you were always meant to rise. That peace, that compassion, that love, that harmony was never only on the ground, it is wherever you are. And as you rise above those clouds, as you get beyond the atmosphere, as you head into space, to whichever corner of space that you would like to, watching planets and asteroids and comets and just everything all around you, allowing yourself to just continue bathing in that peace and being held, feeling fully supported. And as you get to wherever you've gone to in space, allow yourself to look at the stars all around you, the stardust. Allow yourself to look at the magnificence of those stars, of the history within each of them, the thousands and millennia, thousands and thousands and thousands and billions of years of everything that is and ever was. And as you do so, you recognize that they're trying to speak to something within you. And as they do so, you recognize that you're made of those same particles as all of those other stars. That within you, that magnificence, those thousands and thousands and thousands and billions of years also exist. And as you recognize that, you recognize that that stardust exists within you, not because of any actions that you've taken, not because of any good things, not because of anything at all, but just because it does. And you recognize that nothing could ever take it away. Nothing that you've done that you may feel guilt about or shame or anything else takes that away. And in fact, everything, good and bad, just there. That stardust exists regardless. And as you do so, allow yourself to draw energy from those stars, again, recognizing that you are that magnificence, that you are all of those stars. And as you look back from that hot air balloon, allow yourself to see Earth far in the distance. Allow yourself to see that every single person on that planet also has that stardust. Regardless of the conflict we have with them, regardless of whether we love them or hate them, regardless of anything at all, that stardust is just there. So allow yourself to take a few more deep breaths here, really basking in that light, in that starlight, taking in that stardust that again is just internal, not just external. And when you're ready, allow yourself to get back in that hot air balloon if you weren't in it, or just allow the hot air balloon to slowly begin drifting away back into Earth. And as you look at the planet, you recognize that you exist everywhere, that it's not just about one planet or another, that you get to be everything everywhere, whether we're so close to the stars or not, because we are those stars. Allow the hot air balloon to drift all the way back to that place where you were at peace, where there was harmony, where there was love. Allow yourself to recognize that, again, that place is yours, that nobody can ever take it away from you, that you can return to it whenever you choose to. Allow yourself to begin walking away, honoring that you will return to this place when you choose to, that that place is yours. And slowly begin drifting back, moving away from the visuals, in that space where you were just floating. Allow yourself to maybe hover right above your body, honoring where you are right now in Austin, Texas. And allow yourself to slowly get back into your body, into this moment in time, where we'll have another 50 or so minutes of this conversation. And then you'll have a break and more tacos. And as you get back into your body, allow yourself to slowly wiggle your toes, maybe wiggle your fingers, just feeling the sensations in your body, honoring that all of those emotions that we just had, they're still here. They live within our bodies in different ways. Allow yourself to honor wherever they might be living. And allow yourself to slowly come back into the space. Whenever you're ready, opening your eyes and rejoining us. So how are you all feeling now? Okay, awesome. There was a possibility that all of you would just completely fall asleep, which again is wonderful. So I like starting off with that exercise for a multitude of reasons and in a multitude of different conversations, right? But for me, doing an exercise like that, really honoring the stardust within all of us, And that was a huge part of my journey, where I was able to honor everybody else's stardust, but my stardust was the hardest to be able to honor until doing a bunch of work later, right, was fully able to honor it. But as soon as I got there, everything just looks so different. Every interaction feels so different. My work feels so different. Because when I go to work now, when I work with different communities and different individuals, and I usually get called in when things are a disaster, according to like everyone else. Like that's usually when people want transformation, right? I wish it was like, folks are like, hey, we're doing amazing. And also we want to do even better. How about we pay you a lot of money to come and help us do better? I'm still waiting for that call. So if any of you are there, give me a call. But usually it's, hey, we all despise each other and like, this is really, really, really awful. And it's our breaking point, right? It's either we all leave this, we never do this job again, right? Or we fix things. And usually by getting to that stage, we're able to start moving things forward. So I'm also there for that, right? But I get to bring that stardust into every space that I'm in every conversation, everywhere I go. And so my question to all of you for later, right, just for you to reflect on both today, tomorrow, and every day of your lives, and for everyone around you, is if we really did look at the world like that, if we looked at every single person, like they were all made of stardust, what kind of life would we live? Even if we just looked at ourselves as made of stardust, what kind of life would we want to live, that we deserve? And how would that impact our work? And maybe it ends up being that our work completely shifts as well, right? That everything around us shifts as well. Everything is possible. But even if you take nothing else from this presentation, from this conversation, but that, just hold on to these questions. So the other reason that I like starting with that conversation is because for me, seeing people with stardust or as stardust, seeing myself as stardust is by itself transformative, right? Getting to that place where we're honoring everybody as stardust and seeing that in every single thing that we do, that's transformative, right? And so often within the conversations we've been having, we've been talking about how do we transform just our services? But for me, and for today's conversation, I want us to kind of go above that, go outside of that realm entirely, kind of like what we were doing with the out-of-the-box conversations, right? And really thinking of transformation as a completely inclusive, holistic thing. We don't just transform our work. We don't just transform ourselves. Transformation is basically like, if you think of like a volcano in the middle of the ocean erupting, which causes like an earthquake, which then causes a tsunami, right? Which literally changes the shape of the entire planet, right? When we fully transform, everybody around us has to shift. When we transform ourselves, our work immediately has to transform. Or what happens at times is it gets left behind. And it's the same way with the people around us. But transformation is felt by everybody around us, right? When I transform, or at the times in my life where I've had to go through deep transformation, right, to really take charge of my life, that changed all of the family dynamics. It literally changed people entirely. It changed the type of work I was doing. It changed the spaces that I was working in, right? It changed my friend groups, the people around me. It changed the way strangers interacted with me, right? And so I really want you to think about it as this really holistic thing. And for me, there are really 3 different components that make transformation what it is. I'm going to read them off this, and I know a bunch of you can see it, right? But we're addressing the root causes for transformation. So if we're saying that we're doing transformation, but not addressing root causes, then it's not transformation, right? We have to address the root causes. And that part of me is kind of like the engineer. That's where I wear my engineering hat, because engineering is just about problem solving. And what I love to do, like, You've probably heard a bunch of things in that bio where you're like, none of this makes sense, right? Why is this person an engineer and a peer support specialist and doing equity work somehow and like somehow still here? Like this does not make sense. And where's the psychosis in this, right? Like none of it makes sense, but it does to me, right? Because I utilize all the different skill sets from all of those different things and bring them into different fields. And so you'll notice some of the tools that I'll talk about and the different theories and things like that. Some are engineering, some are social science based, some are just lived experience based. Some, they're just from everywhere, but they're all transferable. So that's the number one thing. It has to be a complete deviation from the status quo. So if we do something that's expected of us, that's not transformation, right? If we leave this space and we change one thing that's fully expected of us, that's wonderful. I don't want to take that away. Change is beautiful. And I want to honor every single change, and we should celebrate every single little piece of it. But it's not transformation, right? Transformation is a complete deviation of it. So if you think about even the world of like peer support, right, as it started 40, 50 years ago, that was a complete deviation from everything around us, right? It wasn't just small change. It was literally being like, hold up, people with lived experience are valid. That by itself was a huge deviation. And so you want to think of things like that. What is going to be a huge deviation in your line of work? Something that nobody's expecting, right? Something that will probably cause chaos. But for me, it's within that chaos that we can fully transform. Chaos is not a bad thing. Sometimes it's the most beautiful of things because we want those high energy, high emotion things to really support our transformation, right? We don't really transform if I'm just like, I don't really care about any of this, right? This is fine, right? But when I'm experiencing rage, right? Or shame, or a lot of those emotions that carry so much power, right? As stigmatized as they are, that's when we can transform, right? I didn't build nonprofits and movements and things like that because I was like, injustice is fine. It's okay. Maybe tomorrow will be better. No, right? And every single movement, every single thing that you all have created is usually through some of these emotions that are usually heavily stigmatized. That's number two. And the number three is that it's sustainable. So if we do something, right? Let's say we're addressing a root cause and we're deviating from the status quo. And within 6 months, it can go back to how it was, then it wasn't full transformation. Let's do it some more, right? Transformation is something that we cannot take back, right? And think about a butterfly, for example, right? A butterfly can never go back to being a caterpillar. And that's how it is for everything that we do, right? As we're transforming, we can never really go back. So with that said, for us to kind of look at some of these things for our conversation today about psychosis and marginalization, for me, when I think of that, when I think about what's necessary in our field of work, right, for FEP, for even later on in life, for really everything around psychosis, for me, it's not just a matter of transforming the programs themselves. It's also about potentially redefining / reclaiming psychosis as a whole, right? And if you think of the definition of psychosis, it's not this inherently evil, awful thing. But at the same time, I think we can all agree and honor that within our society, right, psychosis is seen as this big, awful, horrible thing, right? Just on the lead up to this, over the last couple of weeks, I've literally just been taking like mental notes on how often people will use the term psychotic in the worst possible ways, right? And it happened at least half a dozen times every single day. And these are like very progressive, very like equity-oriented spaces that I'm a part of. And yet it still comes up so often. And so for me, it's really about that redefinition, for us to really deviate from things, for us to really go into something that's very sustainable. For me, it also requires us not just to change our services, but to change what we're actually building it off of. And if I ask you all, what is psychosis? And yesterday that question was asked in the afternoon, right? Of how do you talk to someone about psychosis? We'll all have very different answers. But for me, it's still an answer that has room for growth and improvement and transformation. So for the rest of this presentation, we're basically just going to work our way towards that. And before we can work our way towards that, right, we talked about addressing those root causes. And one of the saddest things for me when I do that exercise, when I recognize the stardust within me, when I can see stardust in other people, is also recognizing that for hundreds of years, specifically the last 400 or 500 years, literally even just saying those words out loud meant I lost a lot of these human rights. And as I think about it more, I recognize that over the last 400 or 500 years, there were a lot of people who did not have these human rights, right? Whether psychosis related or not whatsoever. And as I think about it some more, I recognize that not everyone has these today. And I recognize that there are so many people who can lose these things. And I'm not talking about the rest of the world, right? I'm talking about the United States in particular, right? The rest of the world we'll get to later. And by later, I mean a different conference, right? We're just talking about the United States here, right? At different times, individuals can lose those or have been born without a lot of them. And so with psychosis, right, how many of you know the intersect between being an immigrant and the mental health system as a whole? Okay, a handful of you, awesome. But the vast majority of you don't. So when I think about my experiences, so I'm not a US citizen. I've lived in the US maybe 16, 17 years. I was here as a child and then I left and then I moved back and I've lived in like 10 different countries. So there's a lot of back and forth in my life. But when I went to college, when I was studying engineering, when we had those naps, I was an international student. And as an international student, I knew that if I went and accessed accommodations, that jeopardizes my immigration status potentially. I knew that if I was hospitalized and I failed my classes, I get deported. Right? And it's not even a very complex system, right? It's basically like, nope, you fail, deported, right? And it wasn't, and there were lines in between, right? Fail classes, lose scholarship, lose housing, not be able to pay anymore, even though I had like 4 jobs and trying to pay everything all at the same time, right? Still get deported. And it was like that afterwards as well, right? And so after college, even as I was taking charge of my life, right, things still happen. I've lived with severe psychosis for the vast majority of my life. And I'll talk a little bit more about that journey later, right? But later on, as I got into the workforce, first, I had to work as an engineer because that was my degree. I had to make a certain amount of money, otherwise I can't stay in the country, which is why I went into engineering in the first place. As you can tell, I do love engineering. I love problem solving, right? But being forced into things is not helpful for anybody, right? And at the same time, I was trying to do all the mental health work stuff and the peer support stuff. And when you have multiple full-time jobs, it is not good for psychosis. I do not recommend, right? But trying to do all of that and then dealing with relationships and friendships and violence in various places and all of those different things and having 7, 8 different mental health diagnoses, all of it on top of each other, everybody has a breaking point. And I had mine in 2017, or one of mine. I have a lot. And they're wonderful. I love breaking points, and I'll tell you why later. Right? And I ended up in 3 different hospitals, had to take time off from work. And I also knew that I had a deadline. If I took more than 90 days off, I get deported. It doesn't matter that I still had my job. It didn't matter that my work was very, very supportive. They were actually really, really supportive. Mostly because 2 other people passed away that same week that I ended up in the hospital from that same team that I was in. This is engineering, y'all, right? Like we talk about like social services as like lethal at times to us, but it happens in so many different spaces. And I'll talk about their story a little bit later as well. And if I forget, somebody ask a question about it so I can like bring it back. But they were all supportive. Everybody was supportive. But 90 days. And it was interesting, towards the end of those 90 days, my psychiatrist and therapist at the time were like, "You are not ready to go back to work." I'm like, "Yes, I know. Sign the papers." And they're like, "But what about part-time?" I'm like, "Sign the papers? No. Yes, I'm not ready. Yes, I would rather part-time. Yes, I need way more time off. And also, is going back to work better than being deported at the moment? Yes." And they did eventually, but it took literally weeks of trying to convince them, because they were just like, "No, that can't be a real thing." Until they looked it up and they were like, "Ooh, it is a real thing." It was like, yes, it's a very real thing. And it has these consequences for individuals, right? And those are just a few different intersectional identities. And how many of you would say you're familiar with intersectionality? Okay, a lot of people, but not everyone. So I'll explain it very briefly. So the concept of intersectionality is basically how, just like the word, how our different identities intersect, specifically, usually, how our identities of marginalization intersect. And it was initially created to specifically talk about Black working class women, and talking about how that intersectionality is different than, for example, white working class women. And it's not saying that 1 + 1 = 2, it's 1 + 1 = an undetermined number, right? Because that overlap isn't just two things coming together, it's creating a completely new thing in the middle that nobody else would experience without those different intersects, right? And so for me, when I think of psychosis, I always think about those intersectionality pieces, right? And so in your work, as you're working with different individuals, have to be doing that as well, right? It's not just a person living with psychosis, right? If everyone I worked with just saw me as a person living with psychosis, and for the most part they did, they wouldn't really be able to support me in the ways that I really needed to. Because yes, psychosis was a thing internally, right? It was causing a lot of different harm early on, but also that wasn't my number one problem. That wasn't the thing that was going to kill me. There were so many other identities that took precedence over that. And being able to recognize that, right? And honoring that people know that for themselves. That we don't need to know everything about every single identity, but people do, right? And they tell us, we just listen. So at the same time, I do want to honor, though, and really make sure that everyone's aware a little bit of this history, is that, so historically, right, those different intersectional identities, and there's a huge correlation, right, in terms of looking at being Black in the United States, right, and all the way from like slavery onwards, thinking of one of the very first like mental health challenges that was like, and it wasn't an official diagnosis at the time in the mid 1800s, but how many of you are familiar with, I'm going to mispronounce this, but drapetomania? Okay, a couple of people. So basically, drapetomania was a diagnosis given to runaway slaves. If you ran away as a slave, you were labeled as with drapetomania. So what that created at the time is it created a system where, yay, slavery is over. You have a mental illness, right? You have mental illness. Everybody has a mental illness now. And so as treatment, 18 hours of labor in this facility. And we rarely talk about that, right? But that was that in between, right? We'll talk about slavery and then somehow jump to Jim Crow and then go into now. But that entire area between the end of slavery, before the end of slavery, past Jim Crow, was just that, right? And so when we're talking about how different marginalized groups have a lot of stigma around mental health, that's why, right? When we talk about why the immigrant community doesn't talk about mental health, it's because to this day, if you have a mental illness, quote unquote, you're barred from immigration to this country, right? If I said I lived with psychosis on my initial visa application, I didn't have diagnosis back then, and I'll talk a little bit about that later, right? But if I said I live with psychosis, the US was never going to give me a visa to begin with. Like, that's a reality. So all those laws about disability and mental health challenges that prevented people from immigrating in the 1800s, they're still very much real in 2022. Just most people don't really know about them. And so for me, it makes perfect sense why marginalized groups would never talk about this, right? And those are just two groups. Then we can bring in queer and trans people, right? Y'all, being trans was a mental illness up until like 30 years ago. Not even, in some places less than that, right? And so all of those things exist. And at the same time, and these are just two books that I would actually recommend for everyone to read, about kind of that intersect between being Black and trans and the mental health system, and then just a better understanding of transness and children in particular, because most people don't really know that history. But at the same time, most of what we know about psychosis came from testing on all of those different groups of people. Our entire understanding of gender comes from testing and experimentation on trans and intersex kids. Right? The fact that we know what puberty is because of that. The fact that we understand much of psychosis is because of that. And I say that not to disempower everyone here and be like, oh, this is an awful field and everything is horrible, but because we need to understand those root causes. We need to understand the current state. We need to understand where different things come from to be able to really move past them. So I want to talk a little bit about how I view psychosis. Again, working towards that definition of what psychosis is. And it took me a really, 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 really long time to work through psychosis. So I've always been experiencing different pieces of it. The earliest I remember is actually like 22 months old. And since then, it just continued in very different ways. And at the same time, I was also receiving other diagnoses or like other things that were happening. So when I was 6, for example, I was diagnosed with autism. But as I mentioned, my family always also moved around quite a lot. And so immediately after that diagnosis, we ended up moving from Jordan. So I was diagnosed in Jordan, actually, and then we moved to Arizona. And something magical kind of happened that I reflect on now, and I think is magical. Years ago, I was like, this is awful. But everybody forgot about that diagnosis. Everybody forgot about everything else that was kind of happening. And I got to, despite living with psychosis for so long, it was never really stigmatized in my childhood because I wasn't part of a system, because nobody ever really named it. And so I never really even viewed it as that bad of a thing throughout my childhood. And it really wasn't until teenage years and things like that that it did start getting kind of out of hand, right? When I did need the most support and couldn't find it, right? As I was trying to grapple with all my other identities, right? And everything that I've always known, is when all of a sudden it started getting to a place where transformation was definitely needed, right? And I really needed to take charge of my life. And I'm always incredibly grateful for that. So at 17, due to psychosis, and would be like a direct correlation where out of all the identities, it was just psychosis that really drove me to leave home at 17. I became homeless for about a year, 2 months, something like that. And to be honest with you, that was the best thing that could have happened to me in that moment in time. So when you think of that, when you think of a person becoming houseless, right, as like this really awful thing, sometimes it's actually what that person needs in that moment in time. Every single person should have access to housing, but nothing should ever be enforced on us. Because during that year, as I was able to fully separate, and it was, in terms of psychosis, it was a lot of different beliefs. It was hearing things and seeing things, but it was really the beliefs that were really driving me completely out of that. But it was during that year where I recognized, no, like things needed to be better. And I was holding on to two different things at the same time. So I was holding on to immense suicidality, but also holding on to this like 2% chance of like, maybe I won't die. It was like, well, if it's a 2% chance, I'm not living like this, right? And like this, I don't mean on the streets. I mean in terms of being able to access joy, being able to access a sense of peace and harmony and just be happy for a moment in time, because it had been years, potentially most of my life, that I had never experienced any of those different things because of all of those different intersects. So fast forward to college, I unfortunately was not part of like any group. So like students with psychosis, that sounds amazing. I was part of like Active Minds, but even then you don't really talk about psychosis because that's a crazy thing, right? Like we talk about depression and anxiety because those are the safe ones. Psychosis means you're actually crazy, right? Like we don't talk to you then. And so there was really no space to ever talk about it, to even recognize like, what is psychosis? Because every definition, every experience that I heard was so different than mine. And over time I recognized, and it was the same way for gender and orientation. I didn't start identifying as trans until much later, even though I've always known I'm trans. But everything I saw around queerness and transness and psychosis was always white people. And I just never saw anybody look like me. And so I was like, well, I can't be queer or trans or psychotic because like, excuse my language there, but I view it as a positive thing, right? But like, I can't be any of those things because like, that's just not me, right? That doesn't look like me. That experience looks so different than me. Like, that's not what's trying to kill me. Until one day I read this essay. So how many of you are familiar with Hari Ziad? I was hoping at least one person. Okay, Hari Ziad is this incredible non-binary individual out in New York, I want to say. They're a Black poet and filmmaker and like a million different things. They're just incredible. And they had an essay called My Gender is Black. And basically the essay is just about those words. And as soon as I saw just the headline of that essay, everything made sense, right? Because Hari Ziad talks about how gender for a Black person is not the same as gender for a white person, right? Your Blackness is part of that gender. For example, for me, being a Muslim, being an immigrant / refugee in certain places, being disabled, right? Having psychosis, all of those different things are part of my gender. I can't fully separate them, right? My gender is not just about my singular gender identity. It's connected to every single one of those different intersectional identities, right? My autism is connected to it. Everything is connected to it. And it's connected to how the world perceives me more than anything else in that way. And as soon as I read that, I was like, okay, that makes so much sense, right? Like my gender is not just, at the time it was non-binary, now I identify with like gender queer. It wasn't just non-binary. It was that as a Muslim person walking into a space, relationships, sex, everything is stigmatized in a different way. It wasn't that the world was looking at me differently because I was non-binary. It's because as soon as I walk into a room, or as soon as I used to have a very Muslim like first name, right? As soon as people saw that name, that was everything that I am, right? They didn't care about that psychosis. They didn't care about all of those things, or they cared in the worst possible ways, right? Where if I wanted to talk about mental health and I'm a Muslim, right? And at the time was a lot more male passing, right? All of a sudden I must be a terrorist, right? It wasn't, oh, let's work on psychosis, or like, this is a non-binary person, or any of those different things. And so for me, all of that made sense. And as I've been thinking about it for the last few years in terms of psychosis, for me, my psychosis is kind of similar. Is that my psychosis is not just about having a different lived reality than other people internally. It's about also having a completely different lived reality on the outside, externally, in everything. So my psychosis is indigenous, right? It's immigrant, it's queer, it's trans, it's all of those different things. Because it's not just my internal state of being. And that was one thing that I could never explain to mental health professionals. And I share this, again, not to disempower you, but because like, y'all, I want us to get there, right? And we can, I wholeheartedly believe that. But I remember I was in the hospital in 2017, and one day I like finally had enough like consciousness to be able to have conversation, because it took a while, right? And I was sitting with this psychiatrist and I was trying to explain it to him because it finally hit me. And in this hospital, it was either you had self-esteem issues or you have addictive behavior problems. It was one or the other. And so at the time, they were like, okay, we don't see much addictive stuff. Let's put you in the self-esteem thing. And it finally hit me a few days later. And I was like trying to explain it to this person. I was like, I don't not love myself. I love myself. But I love myself so much that I don't want to be here. That is the problem, right? Is that I love myself way too much to still be alive. And this person's like, I hear you, I hear you. So what you're saying is you're at a beach and you want to learn how to surf. I was like, I'm at a beach and I know how to surf. I am an expert surfer and there are sharks in the water, so I refuse to go in the water. And he was like, I hear you, I hear you. He was like, so what you're saying is you want to learn to hit the ball out of the ballpark. I was like, no. But at that point, I was like, you're just not gonna get it. But I was really proud of myself because I'm definitely not a sports person, but I understood sports in that conversation. So yeah, really proud of that. And then tried explaining it to nurses and to social workers and the mental health assistants and everybody. And they thought it was denial. And the only person who understood was Bell Hooks, because I had Killing Rage by Bell Hooks with me. And I don't know if y'all read that book. Killing Rage is incredible to like reclaim rage. But like in my head, like Bell Hooks was gonna tell me how to get rid of my rage. But the first line in it is basically how she wants to murder this person next to her on this airplane because of how awful they've been. And I'm like, so validating. This is cathartic. This is great. This is all I need. Stayed there a few more days because I was like, this is nice. I don't want to leave yet. And then I did leave and then had to do so much of that work elsewhere. So just keep some of those things in mind. All right, so when we look at these two different things, and I'll move aside a little bit just so folks can see it, but you basically have one side that's basically the ideal outcomes for individuals with psychosis or anything else that we have been talking about, right? So full-time employment, having consistent support systems, having no to little symptoms, not a lot of conflicts, things like that. And then on the other side, you have like very inconsistent employment or potentially no employment. You have individuals who can't do their own paperwork and things like that. Very few friends, not really clear trajectory for work, things like that. So can we all agree that normally we would say that to the left side is like this ideal outcome? That is the only thing worth celebrating. Well, other than the smaller things, right? And different steps in the way and everything like that. But that is the ideal outcome, at least from the mental health system that I have been a part of. Okay, I see a bunch of nods. Absolutely. I'm on that side. I'm on the side, personally, I don't work full-time. I never want to work full-time ever again. I have very, very, very few friends. I don't ever want to do my own taxes, ever. And if I have to file an insurance claim, I want multiple supports. I want like 5 friends to come over. I don't really have 5 friends. 3 friends, right? We're talking about few friends here. 3 friends, maybe some strangers. Someone else should do it for me because I don't want to, right? The amount of anxiety I will experience. And for a long time, I was trying to like, everyone was telling me you have to do all of these things, right? But I would go into work as like a manager in a Fortune 500 and like as an executive in nonprofits and all that kind of stuff. And if I was like, oh, I need like note-taking assistance or I need assistance with scheduling things, everyone's like, oh my God, yes, absolutely. You are an executive. You deserve all the support. I go into those same spaces and I'm like, hello, psychosis. I need support. They're like, whoa. Are you really equipped to do this work? Oops, my earring completely fell off. It's okay. It just wanted to draw attention to itself. It's beautiful earrings. Right? And so there's that complete like double standard that exists within so much of that. And for me, I'm just like, no, if I don't like something, I'm not going to do it. And if I do want to do something, I'm going to fight to do it. Like I live with fairly severe social anxiety. If you ask me to come and talk about, well, maybe now it would be better, but when I was studying engineering, I would literally run away if I had to do a presentation. And yet now you probably see me up here and you're like, this person is probably so good at all presentations. No, it's because I care about this, right? That I was willing to do that work. But for all the other areas, I'm just like, no. Right? And I work on a lot of those things. So not only that I want to live this way, I want everyone to be able to live this way. Right? So thinking of like even a full-time employee, right, quote unquote, what does that even mean? Right? 40 hours a week is such an arbitrary number. It doesn't mean anything. And I have been starting to see things, right, in other spaces where we're moving towards like a 30-hour work week is a full-time week, right, within like tech industry. And you have different types of accommodations and things like that, but they're not called accommodations, they're just there. Right? And so what would the world look like if we structured work or paperwork or any of those things around the most marginalized? Right? It's not, okay, well, everyone can do this fine. There's just 2 of you that will need a note taker or something. No, like, why don't we all just get note takers? If you don't want one, say you don't want one, that's fine. Right? But instead, the onus is on everybody else to be like, I don't want to work a full-time week. And if I do ever go back into full-time employment, right, I will be negotiating that I will only be there for 30 hours a week. And I learned that back in my engineering job, where I remember they had a bunch of changeover and a million different things. And it was a new team that came together. And I remember that one of my coworkers, who is this incredible, incredible lesbian from Hong Kong, literally day one, none of us know each other. She's like, boss person, I won't say the name, was like, I will be here 4 days a week. You get me 4 days, I don't, or you get an empty desk forever. And it was literally, that was my introduction to her. And I was like, you are the greatest thing ever. And she wasn't saying, let me do more work those 4 days a week. She was just like, nope, I will be here 4 days. You take it or you leave it. And she had like 30, 35 years of experience in that space. And so she could have been like, I'm working 2 days a week, and they would have said yes, right? But watching that happen and how so much of those things don't make sense is where I want to shift the world, right? And that's part of the work that I do with different organizations. And one of those organizations, actually, it is peer support related. So I don't know if any of you have heard of Trans Lifeline, or if a lot of you do. So recently worked with them to do not only potentially moving to a 32-hour work week as full-time, but to also increase the salaries of everyone and try to work towards pay equity. So within Trans Lifeline, as a peer support specialist, right, without certification, you will get trained on the job, all that kind of stuff. And it's the only helpline that's completely run by trans people for trans people. Their starting salary is $55,000, and they're moving to a 32-hour work week, which in most places is unheard of. For you to be paid for full-time, 32 hours, have those 8 hours for yourself, and also be getting paid that amount of money is like unheard of. And to me, it's still not enough, right? We can still do even more. Let's get to more. So these are just beautiful pictures of me because, you know, I like it when people look at me, as you all should. And just to highlight, usually when I used to do this, I used to actually I would put like the sadder looking pictures, right? Of Psychosis and all that kind of stuff. And a few years ago, I realized that this is psychosis. That this is what I look like when I'm seeing things that others do not, when I'm hearing things that others do not, when I'm experiencing things that others do not. I live in that world now. And I absolutely love it. And so going back to that definition, I'll wrap up in like a couple minutes so we can have some questions those last 10 minutes. But just before we get to that final definition, right? So I love psychosis at this point, and we'll carry that over with everything else that we said. But I want to mention one thing about transformation. Sometimes transformation is also reclaiming something that we used to have. And the thing with psychosis in particular, the thing that makes it different than most mental health challenges is that literally for thousands and thousands of years, psychosis was celebrated, and to this day is still celebrated in certain parts of the world. How many of you have heard of that before? A bunch of you, awesome. And yet how many of us have really brought that into our work? That concept, awesome, amazing, love you, we need to talk. Right? Because psychosis for so many years, for literally thousands of years, for the vast majority of human history, has been fully celebrated and seen as a gift. It's really been the last few hundred years and the last 100 years where we have basically sent it all over the world, right? We have exported it everywhere. And now we've basically made it this horrible, horrible thing. And we're starting to move away from that. But I like pointing this out because, again, we don't have to recreate something to get to that definition of psychosis. If the definition of psychosis has always been a gift and a blessing, it makes people more spiritual, right? And more in tune with everything and have more access to everything, then we can go back to that. And I also like to highlight this because, again, that 40-hour work week situation is new, right? For thousands of years, that was not a thing. It was not a, hey, let's go into an office or on Zoom meetings for thousands of years, right? Like, not a thing. Having work that is actually meaningful to us, that builds on our strengths and skill sets, that is. Doing things in the way that makes the most sense for each of us has always been the way it was because none of us were disposable. And so if someone wants to do 40 hours, amazing, do 40 hours. But if someone else can only do 3 hours a week, that's so amazing, right? We each bring completely different things to the table. And so think of how can you bring that into your workspace, into your teams? I do want to highlight one last thing. How many of you are familiar with assemblage theory? Nobody, awesome. Usually it's nobody. So a lot of times we'll just talk about intersectionality and the conversation will stop there. For me, intersectionality is one half of the conversation. Intersectionality is absolutely critical. And I always honor that it was specifically created for Black working class women. And it has helped in so many different ways. Unfortunately, in a lot of other ways, intersectionality has been hijacked, right? And has caused a lot of harm and been used against specifically Black working class women, right? Really want to honor all of that. And a part of that is because of assemblies. So assemblies is basically how do we connect with one another? Based on identities, based on experience, based on a lot of different things. So for example, and it could be two different things. So in terms of safety, so for example, if you put me in a room with queer trans Muslims, I will feel a sense of belonging without having to do anything else, right? I will just be there. We are good. These are my people. And it's like that for a lot of marginalized groups. And that's important and beautiful to acknowledge. And we should have more and more spaces for that. And that's important in your line of work because sometimes you're not going to be the right person to talk to that person. Your team might not be the right group of people. But also, how do you transform your team to become the right group of people so that you're fully representative of everybody that you're working with? So that's one side of it. The second side of it, though, is that we assemble, again, based on identities and sometimes professions, sometimes different characteristics, strengths. It could be a lot of different things. The reason I bring it up here as well is because how many of you feel kind of like this defensive reaction when people are really critical of your work? I won't wait for all the hands to go up, right? And that's because you're assembling with your work, right? All of a sudden, we begin assembling, regardless of identities, regardless of everything else, with the clinician title, right? Or it could be psychiatrist, it could be psychotherapist. You could break it down further. You could even have a small branch of one of those things. But when we assemble within that, it makes that thing untouchable. And when we make something untouchable, it means we are no longer going to transform it, right? Because all of a sudden that becomes tied into our survival and we don't want to change it because if we change it, we don't know who we are anymore. We don't know where to feel safe anymore. And so I bring it up because that's something that all of us have work to do. Because when we assemble in that particular way, it means we stop transformation from happening. When we talk about complete deviation from the norm, when we're talking about like those out-of-box ideas, it's so hard to leave that box because we assemble in it. That box is safety now. And so recognizing it and moving it away makes a lot of difference. And I'll leave this slide up as we take questions, but it's basically just a few things that people can do that you can do in your workspace to really begin some of that transformation. In particular, I will highlight one of them. So if I am working in your office as a peer support specialist and I am making a 5th of a psychotherapist, it doesn't matter how much you tell me my voice matters, because I am worth a fifth of that person. And so think about that and move your teams forward. And I know funding is usually a thing, but y'all, there's so much funding out there. It's not just state and federal funds. There's so much out there. Need support? Come talk to me. It's part of the work that I do. Let's make things happen, because the impossible is nothing. Like, we've all done it before. So, yeah, we'll take questions.
Yaffa, that was incredible. Thank you. Outstanding. Thank you, Yaffa. Natalie, I'm going to go ahead and start with you. Do we have any questions from our virtual participants?
Hi, thank you so much. We do have a couple of questions. Let me quickly pin myself, if you don't mind. All right. Thank you for such an outstanding presentation. Can you hear me, Jennifer?
Yep, you sound great.
Perfect. So the first question we have is, would you consider freedom of expression a human right?
That's a fun question. I say it's a fun question because I think oftentimes, and I don't know where to look, but I'll look at the camera because I think that's maybe where you can see me, right? I think sometimes we ask questions and word them in a way where we're not actually asking what we're really asking for, right? And to me, so a question like that, I would need the person to really define, what are we saying with freedom of expression, right? What are we defining as a right, right? What are we defining as even a human being? Because I find that oftentimes when we're talking about all of those things, and this is a very roundabout way of answering this question, I know, but oftentimes when we're talking about all of these things, we're not actually talking about everyone, right? We're actually talking usually about very specific individuals, and we need clarity on that. Because for example, me as a Muslim person, right? You probably don't want me saying anything out there. And I know I can't, right? If I go into an airport and say the B word, I'm not even going to say it out here, right? It does not end well, right? And so really thinking of that, of who are we actually talking about? How are we defining all of these different things? Because those things change drastically. And I find oftentimes we're trying to reference specifically like the Constitution and things like that, which is great, cool. And also so much has changed. The world is a completely different place. So here we're literally talking about potentially changing the definition of psychosis to this magical, beautiful gift. We need to be able to do that for everything around us. And oftentimes we're not really doing that. And again, we're usually having conversations in a way where we're trying to find these answers, but it's not actually telling us what we actually want to know and what we actually want to say. And that freedom of expression piece is really critical because we are talking about psychosis, right? As a person living with psychosis, I don't get to just go anywhere and say whatever I want. As a Muslim, I don't get to say those things. I am criminalized for so much of it, and so many other people are too, right? And so how do we also address that, right? Of this baseline of technically we all have freedom of expression is not a reality for the vast majority of people. And so for me, we can't really answer that question until we go and have all of those different conversations. And those are really important conversations to have. And yes, they'll give us more and more questions, but that's wonderful, right? That's how we transform. It's not a matter of just answering a single question. It's about doing all the work that's necessary, like we've been talking about, to really get to where we need to go.
That was excellent. Yeah, excellent. Thank you, Yaffa. All right, looks like we have a question here from our audience.
Thank you so much for this presentation. It's great. I'm just curious, you mentioned a metaphor of a butterfly, and you were talking about how these numinous moments where we go through these intense experiences with psychosis, which I personally resonated with. So thanks for saying that. But you mentioned those moments being sort of like you can't go back. And I just wonder if you could talk a little bit about the cyclical nature of when people do go back and how it's through new eyes and what that looks like on a practical level.
Yeah, absolutely. So just for clarity, so that cycle for like the butterfly is specifically around transformation, right? I think in terms of our personal lives, I think there's so much wealth of growth and even parts of our transformation to be able to go back to certain things within our own life to really be able to claim those things and be able to move forward. But it's really kind of referencing this thing of when we transform, regardless, on a personal level, on a work level, in any experience, it is so difficult to go back, right? Think about really anything that's ever been like really eye-opening for you in your life, whatever it was. And it could be your own experiences. You can never see the world different the way that you used to the day before or the moment before that happened. So that's kind of what I'm referring to. And at times we think that we're doing transformation, right? That we're moving towards that. And when we realize that we're actually still in the same cycle, for me, like I love those cycles because it tells me there's still more work to do. There's something I missed. Maybe I addressed the root cause, but maybe there's a root cause to that root cause that I didn't know about, right? Let's go back into that until that cycle is broken. And it's so difficult to go back into that cycle, specifically because of that. Basically, you would need a different transformation to get you back into that cycle, right? Which requires so much work and so much effort. And it has to be a huge momentous thing. So again, those cycles, whether we break them, that's magical and wonderful. But even if we're stuck in them, that's such a huge opportunity for that growth and for that transformation. Hopefully that answers that.
That's excellent. We are at 10 o'clock for break. I know we have a couple of folks that are here in the audience that may have a couple questions. Yaffa, would it be okay if we maybe had those once we break, and if you all want to stay to ask
Absolutely.
those questions, would that be all right?
Yeah.
Y'all, I want to give Yaffa another round of applause, please. It was outstanding.
Thank you for joining us for the recording of this presentation from the 2022 South-Southwest Mental Health Technology Transfer Center, MHTTC, First Episode Psychosis, FEP Conference. To learn more about this conference or the work of the South-Southwest Mental Health Technology Transfer Center, please see our website, accessible by the QR code on screen. You may also join our newsletter or follow us on Twitter or Facebook with the QR codes on screen now.